an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Deadwood, Season 3, Episode 4, Full Faith and Credit. In this episode, Alma opens her bank with much pomp and circumstance, I guess. Not as much as I wanted. And the doctor, his cough seems to be worsening, and I still can't tell what Cy feels like he's going to do with Hearst. Is he just that willing to bend over? Really? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. So, I did not start this off by talking about the, what's the word I want? Negotiation feels like too generous a word. The conflict resolution that Seth is in the middle of in this episode, because it is still not resolved by the end of the episode. But I have to say that it really is a nice tie-in thematically with what's going on with everybody throughout, because it just feels like Seth struggling with prideful people who are both incredibly belligerent is just about what's going on with everybody in this camp. And in this case of Seth, obviously, it's a different circumstance because we've got a guy who is brutally racist, the kind of racism that completely infects every single part of the way you see the world and makes you feel like you are this weird victim. But so not everybody in this episode is kind of afflicted with a straight up delusion. But it is similar in that we have a lot of people who are not communicating well or not willing to communicate with each other at all, or just sort of misunderstanding the meaning behind things. It's like an episode full of Calamity Janes, because she's really prime for that kind of thing. You say, would you like a drink? And she's just like, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? So I feel like that's kind of what's going on here overall, is just this vibe of everybody is reacting as if something else was said, and it's weird. And that's not feeling like it's off brand for almost anybody, to be honest, because we all have our weird, I think everybody, and I'm just going to say everybody, even though I tend to be well, not everyone, and sort of qualify my statements when I do this. I'm not going to qualify this. I think everyone has a really sore spot in either their history or their understanding of the world, that if somebody starts to talk to them about that specifically, every single alert is going to go up, and they are going to read into it way, way, way more than the person talking to them realizes. And I think that's what's going on here, is that everybody in this episode is being poked in the exact spot that they have trouble with. And so it's starting to just mess with everybody's perception, because they are all hypersensitive about a certain topic. So I'm going to start off with Jane, because the first moment of her completely acting like somebody has tried to insult her family is poor Blazanov coming to just give her a fucking telegram. I mean, he's doing it with the usual flair that he does, and she acts like he's threatening her and is about to pull her gun. It is just really, it's a moment. So eventually he does, because she tells him to just go ahead and read the message. And, can I just say how much I love when Jane gets like this, though? He says, from Samuel Fields to Miss Jane Cannery. And she says, I don't know any Samuel Fields. And he says, the valediction is N-word general. And it turns out that he is writing to ask what the status is on what happened with the horse. And she's thinking to herself about how she's going to reply when it turns out that they have returned to the camp anyway. So there's no need to reply. For some reason, they sent this and then came back regardless. I have to say, I didn't think Seth was going to hold them personally responsible, but I couldn't be sure. I was still nervous about it. And I was also nervous about Martha, because as much as Martha has shown that she is willing to be inclusive of people that society tends to disapprove of, that often extends only to people with white skin. I mean, we've seen this time and time again. So I was very concerned that she was going to hear they were back and try and force Seth's hand, and that this might be a source of like real conflict between the two of them. Then the horse itself, like, I have to admit, that didn't even occur to me what was going to happen with this horse. And she making sure to tell Seth that they must not do anything to harm the horse itself. I can't tell you guys. I know I've been saying that I love Martha, but like, seriously, that little bit of attention to detail, to something that would be the solution to a lot of people, put down the animal that hurt my kid, it just endeared her to me so much. I think that the fact that she like went out of her way to tell him that and did not argue with him for a second about holding these men responsible either. She has a level of compassion and understanding that I don't think a lot of people would if they had lost their child. So that speaks so highly of who she is, and I just keep being like really happy because I was so concerned, guys, and I continued to be concerned that Seth was going to have to leave Alma and be with a woman that I felt wasn't worthy, quote, worthy of him. Worthy isn't even the right word, that he would have to be with a woman who simply did not see the world the same way that he did, and they would just be in conflict all the time. And I'm so gratified to see that the two of them are, in many ways, on the exact same page, and that however Seth and his brother were brought up, his brother attracted a woman of similar sentiments about a lot of things. So I'm very, very happy right now because this was a little bit of a test in my mind. The way that she reacted to this was going to determine whether or not I continued to like her. And I don't mean like this because I didn't know that the General and Hostetler were coming back this episode. I didn't have any idea, but I just really, the fact that this had not been resolved and we still had this dude who was like kind of squatting on their land, they're in their stables. I definitely had a couple of moments where I was like, there's going to have to be some sort of reckoning at some point. So anyway, the opening of the bank, I really liked this moment because Alma is so, what's the word I want? She's just bubbling with excitement. She's sitting behind a desk and it says loans, and her name is on this little wooden, like, it's burned into, I don't know if it's burned into, it looks like it is, but it might be painted on. And she's wearing this really gorgeous, like, black and silver ensemble that I'm sure is meant to be sort of businesslike and sober, but actually looks to me just dope as hell. It doesn't look businesslike to me at all, but I have to admit that I don't know what businesslike for women in this era even looked like. So I think she's doing the best she can, probably with what she's got. I want to know where she's getting her clothes made, because she keeps on showing up in new stuff, and I really need I need a moment of her meeting up with a dressmaker. I need to see this, like, process. I'm so fascinated by this. So she goes and opens the doors, and everybody is out there clapping, and of course Merrick is here to sort of, like, command the crowd. And she pulls the what do you call it, canvas down off of the sign that says Bank of Deadwood. And Al Swearingen is watching the way that he do. And he's standing on his balcony, and fucking Hearst waves at him across the thoroughfare. And not a big, not like one of those smug little finger waves, like, oh, hey, it's me, remember? The guy who totally, oh, guys. I didn't know that he cut Al's finger off. I thought he smashed his finger. I didn't know he cut it off. I just want to make it clear right now that I'm an idiot who did not know that. And when they talk about it a couple times this episode, I was like, wait, what? Listen, I might be a total dum-dum. Forgive me. But I really didn't realize. We don't see it, you know? We see him bring down this, like, pickaxe hammer thingy. The camera cuts from it. We don't see it land. And we don't really get a clear view of his hand from then on. And he hasn't seen the doctor. So, I guess what I'm saying is that I'm trying to be defensive of the fact that I didn't know that, because I'm saying there's no real reason for me to know that. But, holy shit, that's so much worse. That's so much worse. There's no, like, even if you healed from it and you know, and it didn't heal completely properly, which it clearly wouldn't because he's refusing to see the doctor for whatever reason. Even if it didn't heal properly, you'd still be whole. You'd still feel whole. But this guy literally took something from him. And he will never be able to look at his hands again without remembering this guy and what he did. And that is fucking brutal. And I hate it. I really, really hate it. Like, I don't think that I can emphasize enough to you guys how startled I was when they started talking about it and I realized that I was that wrong. It makes a lot of sense, but it also makes me hate Hearst all the more because I feel like that's totally psychologically purposeful that he did it that way. I'm so irritated. So anyway, he does his little finger wave to be like, hey, except it's not. It's a giant, like, hey, what's up, buddy? Kind of across the thoroughfare wave, like everything's fine. And I really love the fact that Johnny and Dan are down and sort of like see him wave, and they stop and they look up at Al to be like, how's he gonna respond to that? And Al just turns around with his coffee and goes right back inside. And I think it's Johnny who says he just doesn't reply at all. Good for him. Hard agree. I think that's the best way to handle it. I am so happy with how angry Al is throughout this episode. He is disgusted that this guy is going to do this to him and then think that makes it a victory. That's the part that Al finds so insulting, is that he's like, so he thinks he could just cut my finger off and that's going to make me roll over. Really? He thinks this is it. That this is a done deal and he has me fucking by the collar now. That's what he thinks because of a finger. That motherfucker better bring it, because this is not going to end here. And it gave me life. And then we find out at the end of the episode, because we had talked about how a couple episodes ago, I think it was this season though, might have been episode 1. He is talking to that poor whore whose name I don't remember, who has been giving him blowjobs now. She's his new favorite instead of Trixie. And he alludes to a woman who worked as a like the head of an orphanage, I think, who like pimped him out. He says something like that. And at the end of this episode, he is talking to her again, and he starts to get really emotional and says something about how the fact that he was being held down by the captain while Hearst did this made it that much worse, because it rendered him completely helpless and reminded him of another time that he was helpless. And I believe that he's talking about being raped by somebody. And it's his acting in that fucking scene with that monologue is almost too much for me. Like that was really, really beautifully done. Somebody who is talking about something with enough detail to know like vaguely what he's getting at, but unwilling to say the actual words, and also almost unable to say the actual words. There's a vibe to him as he's talking about this that like it's dying on his lips, the whole like description of what went on, because he just can't quite make himself say it. And I love that this girl says, "I don't like it either." And he says, "What's that?" And she says, "When they hold you down, I don't like it either." And it makes him stop and think, and he says, "I guess that's what I do to you, isn't it? With your fucking hair." And she really carefully is like, no, because she doesn't want him to get in trouble. Like, she doesn't want to be the one to put him on the spot. But his response is, well, bless you for a fucking fibber, because he knows that that is exactly what he's doing. And I think he feels a little bad because he never even considered that she's going through the thing that he goes through all the time. Which is, I mean, so many men don't think of what the women in their lives go through, that is not really too surprising. But the fact that he does make that connection on his own, and she doesn't have to like, you know, I really appreciated that she spoke up and said, "I don't like it either." And that he listened and asked what she meant and put it together with his own behavior, instead of being like, "Oh yeah, those guys who do that are trash." He realized he is one of those trash guys that does that exact thing. You know, honestly, that is so... guys, I'm going to get on a soapbox, but only for a minute, I swear. But this is what women are looking for. We don't need men who are perfect. We don't need men who have never made a mistake or had a misogynistic thought or done something that had sexism underlying. That's impossible. You won't find people, even women, who have not done those kinds of things, because misogyny is taught to both sexes and internalized misogyny is a thing. So we're not looking for that. We are looking for men who can recognize when a woman tells them that they have experienced a certain kind of treatment. We are looking for men who step back and look at themselves and are willing to face facts that they have done that kind of shit themselves before. Now, there are certainly things that they can look at their own behavior and be like, okay, no, I don't think I have done that. And maybe that's true. But there are going to be things that guys, their knee-jerk responses, I've never sexually assaulted anybody or sexually harassed anybody, and that's because they have a certain idea of what that looks like. And the things that they have done in their lives don't fit to that description. That doesn't mean it isn't harassment or assault, though, because what the woman experienced might have been very different than what you intended. And that's the thing with Al here. He's doing what he feels he has both a right to do and wants to do, because he's like obviously having some sort of issue with like coming, or it's something that's going on with him that he's putting on her. And it's clearly something that I think is going on with him because of what happened to his hand. I think that he's having trouble, like, getting past that. And it's not like he's trying to hold her down because he's looking to assault her. He's not holding her down because of any maliciousness, but she experiences that the same way. And so what he intends doesn't really matter. And this is all we want, is somebody who is willing to, like, admit that the way they intend something isn't necessarily relevant. It's just not. It's the same with racism. Whether you intended to say something really racist is completely irrelevant to whether or not what you said was racist. And I really liked the scene. I liked him being emotionally vulnerable in front of her, even though it's, like, such a strange sort of relationship. The power dynamic is so deeply off, and it's upsetting at times. Like, it's disturbing. But there's also that, you know, what I had said a couple of episodes ago, which is that I don't feel like Al has any friends. Now he's got this guy Jack in town, but I don't feel like he's talking about this with him the same way. And there's kind of this, like, weirdly sweet moment. And I say sweet with, like, an asterisk because it's similar to sort of Stockholm Syndrome when he's asking her who she's going to vote for sheriff. And she says that she's going to vote for the guy that's going up against Seth. And he's like, no, vote for Bullock. What are you talking about? And she responds with, but Bullock yells at you. Like, she's trying to, like, get on his good side with her vote because she doesn't understand enough to realize that despite the fact that Bullock yells at him all the time, they're still allies. And I just found that to be sort of, like, heartbreaking and, like, so well intentioned, but also, like, a terrible indictment of, like, the mental state this poor woman is in. And I just, like, So anyway, I've pretty much talked about that whole thing already, but I just thought his acting in that scene was so stunning, and I really, really loved it. And it was so unexpected as well. So Hearst waves down at Johnny and Dan also. Johnny waves back and says mornin', and Dan replies, mornin', best time of day to go fuck yourself. And the captain, who had been standing outside eating his breakfast at this point, gets a look on his face and goes back inside. And Hearst just sort of stares at Dan. And I know this was probably not smart of him. I don't care, though. I am here for it forever. And I kind of want to be Dan's friend because you know this motherfucker will do literally anything for you. And this kind of loyalty. I tend to be somebody who side-eyes folks who talk about valuing loyalty because as much as I get that in principle, I find that people who say that sort of thing are often abusive folks who just want to get away with shit. And when they say I value loyalty, what they mean is they want someone who's going to put up with all kinds of toxic garbage behavior and not, like, put up a fuss about it. And so there's, like, that kind of thing where I feel like loyalty is a misused word by a certain type of person. But we see here that, like, in this episode, because, spoiler alert, understandably and correctly, Al chooses Silas to do something for him instead of Dan. We see Dan say to Al flat out, you hurt my feelings. And so it's a loyalty with him that is not like a lay down and take it loyalty. It's I'm loyal because I care about you and I am going to be honest with you about how I feel about how you handled something. And that feels like real loyalty. When you're willing to have that kind of conversation with somebody that you care about, that is, to me, a demonstration of actual loyalty, that you trust the person enough to have this conversation and be honest in your communications with them. So Dan is right now, for me, the MVP, simply because of this interaction and how he handles himself when fucking the captain comes by. because the captain just basically gets in his face and says something about how if Dan ever says this shit again, if he ever talks to Hearst like that again, he will... What is it that he says? I'll just rip your fucking head off, I think is the one. Because he walks in and Al's downstairs. And I feel like if Al hadn't been downstairs when this happened, the whole thing would have gone very, very differently. But thankfully, he's standing right there. And Al says something about how this is a guy that is very much to be feared when someone in front of you is advancing with a weapon. And the captain says, was just doing my job, and holds up a letter to Al. And this is when Dan walks out and says, you don't want to speak like that again to Mr. Hearst. And Dan says, yeah, I do. Do you want to change my fucking mind? And he says, not only will I change your mind, I'll rip your whole fucking head off. And then walks away. And Dan has a look on his face like he's a little bit more frightened than he wants to admit. I think that's how I'm interpreting that expression on his face. I really think Dan had a moment of just like, he's used to being the guy who's totally like willing to not pull punches, and everyone around him is sort of more careful and circumspect. And I think that running up against this captain, he's realizing like, I don't know what this guy is capable of or where he draws the line. And the fact that he was just willing to just say that to me, I'm not used to, because I work for Al and most people are too afraid of Al to ever pull that kind of shit with me. He usually benefits from a kind of reflected privilege, and this is not happening with Hearst. So I'm a little worried, and I really need Dan to not die. I'm not going to lie. Meanwhile, the message that he delivered is that Hearst wants Al to come over for a meeting. And he says something like, wow, he must really take me for an optimist. And I like that he says it like that. He doesn't say a fucking idiot. He says an optimist. And Dan says, I'm going to kill that motherfucker. And Al says, all in good time, which like, amen. And I cannot wait. I am so excited for it. Please let that be really, really soon. Well, he does go over there, and it's a really interesting scene to me because basically what he is doing is talking to both Al and Cy about the fact that he doesn't feel like he's suited to being in camp, but that he wants his interests looked after while he's gone, because he's realizing that this isn't the place for him. He needs to be like out sounding the ground or whatever fucking the boy the earth speaks to. Like, I hate that. He is just really feeling himself with that whole thing, and I am sick to death of hearing about it. And he just seems to believe that he is somehow like almost like he has a superpower or something. And I'm just so over him. So anyway, Al is obviously not interested in cooperating. He's standing up and leaning on this like slab, this like huge plank, in order to ease the pain in his back. And it's a weird thing because anyone else in this position would feel like they were in a position of like being, it's not a power stance is what I'm saying, but he's still able to command them from this vantage point. And I'm sorry, I'm just remembering some moments here because I've got like this scene playing in front of me, and I had forgotten that Al says, can we speed this up? I need to see my physician. And Hearst says, how are you indisposed, Mr. Swearingen? And Al says, sick to my stomach. And finally Hearst says, all right, well, you can go if you want, and he can just report to you what the conversation was. I'd have us reach a new understanding because of the elections, by the quality of certain of the likely victors. I have come to believe as well that my temperament ill suits me for environments such as this one must become, and other opportunities presenting themselves elsewhere, I may best serve my own interests here by standing at some remove. And Al says, "Are you leaving? Can you say it straight out before I have a fucking birthday?" Amen, Al. Holy shit. This is almost on par with Charlie later having a, quote, quick word with Seth when he's in the middle of this fucking negotiation. What's the task you'd give us, and what's our fucking piece for doing it? And Cy keeps stepping in and being like, Al, he's so much more worried about talking to this guy this way, and Al is not interested. And you can see in Cy's face a real flicker of admiration. That he's not going to, like, side with Al at all. He's certainly not going to take that kind of risk. But you can see that Cy knows Hearst hurt Al. And the fact that Al is standing here talking to this man like that, Cy respects the shit out of it. He's surprised by it and he respects it. And I am, like, here for it. Like, I love the whole dynamic of the scene because I feel like it's really setting up to Cy that there is somebody in camp with power who's willing to stand up to this guy. And maybe Cy didn't think that was like, that there was anybody out here willing to do this. And so was, you know, perhaps worried that he was going to be out there trying to, like, resist this dude on his own, and decided not to resist, to just, like, you know, avoid the risk entirely. But now he's realizing that maybe there is somebody that he can go to, that they can organize something to take this dude down. And I don't know what that even looks like. You know, I don't know what taking, like, I have to admit that Hearst just leaving camp entirely and moving on with his life feels like what this actual person probably did. They came into Deadwood, caused a bunch of problems, and then just left. That sounds like a rich person. But I'm hopeful that they're going to be able to do something to get this guy back. So Hearst continues. Who do we kill? What's our pay? Alice, just keep on, like, he took the picks to me simple enough. We'll get to the numbers quickly, as soon as we have the principles in place. And Al replies to him, the principles are the numbers. The numbers are the only principle that I believe in. When you and him come to him, tell fucking Adams and he'll bring you my reply later. Him and me, we've had our last word. And he just walks up on out of there. And you can see that Cy is a little bit concerned that he is going to have to sit here with the guy who has been put into a temper and cope with him. Like, there's a look on his face like, this fucking guy is screwing me, which I really think is a fair response. Like, this guy is somebody whose bad temper gets the better of him. He has just told Cy earlier, I almost raped and killed a guy today, so I'm going to have to bounce. But yeah, this whole scene I just was really into because of what I feel like is happening between Cy and Al in the subtext. I have to assume that Hearst is aware of what's being communicated between the two of them. And I don't know how he countermands that, but we'll see. So that's essentially what's going on with them right now. Let's talk about which one to pick. Let me go to Joni. All right. Joni, she gets approached by Jack in the street again. And it goes slightly better at first than last time because he came up to her in the previous episode and he's obviously interested in the building, but she thinks that he still thinks it's a whorehouse and sends him packing without letting him, like, explain himself. So he approaches her again and is like, hey, I I just need to try again because it didn't go well last time. But I think it's really important that we talk because I'm not interested in what you thought. I'm trying to buy this building from you. And she says that she's not so sure about renting or about selling. And he says, well, what about renting? And she says, what about you go fuck yourself, and walks away. A real strong response. And this is what I mean about people not communicating super well in this episode. Because it's just so out of proportion to what's actually being asked. And he doesn't understand why she's reacting this way. But I appreciate Jack so deeply that he does not take it personally. He just sort of stands there like, what's that about? But he isn't like, that bitch, what the fuck? He really seems to sense, like, clearly I touched on something with her. So I'm just going to let that lay and not really push it any further. And it turns out that what's going on with Joni is, there's a couple things. The one that she talks about on the surface is that she really is concerned about these kids still having a proper schoolhouse. And that she feels like they're depending on this and it's really helping the community. And she feels an obligation in a way to continue that for the sake of everyone. And when she suggests like building a new schoolhouse, and putting that like in the, agreement with this guy, cause she's talking to Charlie about it later. He says something like, well, obviously she will be happy with a new schoolhouse. Like what? Because Joni's sort of like, well, I don't know if she will appreciate having to move. And he's like, I think she'll appreciate a building dedicated to what she does and not to have to teach kids in what used to be a brothel. So yeah, I agree. And it's clear that she's holding on to this for some other kind of reason. And it seems later she says something, and is she talking to him or is she talking to Jane? I'm like trying to find the spot to see exactly what she says. But what it seems like is really going on here. She says that she would love a chance to raise those kids and not have done what she did. And what I think is being said here is basically that she has been forced to have several abortions and deeply regrets not being able to have those kids and raise them and be a mother. And I'm not sure if she's able to have kids at this point. Like, and I don't mean due to her age. I mean, like, if you get a kind of like rudimentary procedure like that done a couple of times, it can damage you if it's not done with extreme care, which, forgive me, I'm going to assume it probably wasn't. And there's also the possibility of having, gotten infected with an STD that can cause sterilization as well. So I don't know if this is simply not in her future at all anymore, or if she's just realizing that it's not in the cards for her personally, because of the way that she's living now. But she really obviously wants to be involved with these school kids, and giving up on that is bumming her out. Like, she's providing by having this guy agree to build a separate schoolhouse. So that is her, being very considerate, and they have her to thank in part for this, but it's not her being like hands-on anymore. And I'm really hoping that she's going to find a way to be hands-on. And I am not somebody who wants kids. I really never, ever have. I've always been baffled by people wanting them, because to me it's such an enormous amount of responsibility that I can't even fathom having the confidence to do it. It's, to me, like there's almost like an arrogance to it, and I don't think that's really fair, but if you get what I mean. But I can't imagine being somebody who does want kids and having to endure abortions over and over again that you don't want. I mean, it's no better than having a kid that you didn't want, And I wonder sometimes about Trixie and whether or not her attachment to Sophia is born of something similar. Because obviously, these bitches are not going to be allowed to have kids. Like, that's not good for business. So, it's just really what women have to endure when they do this kind of, like, when they are put into essentially slavery like this is just really gross. And Joni and Jane, guys, I want them to just be a couple so bad. Can we just please let them be together? Oh my God. The chemistry between the two of them when they're standing alone in the brothel, like saying goodbye finally. And they shake hands because she says that Jane is welcome to go wherever she goes. And Jane shakes her hand and looks at her and then, like, really quickly looks away. And I feel like there's, like, Jane feels something and she just doesn't know how to, like, deal with it. And she probably also isn't sure if Joni feels it or not. There's just so much awkward tension. And I just really believe that there's something there. And I want them together so bad, so bad, so bad. But I'm super, super hopeful that Jane takes Joni up on her offer and that they go off together wherever they wind up going. I just need them together, okay? And the moment when Jane is like, where are they going to put the stage? And Joni says, I know, I can't figure it out. And it's a really funny, like, break in the tension, the way that those lines are delivered. All right. I'm going to talk really briefly about something that confused me and that I feel like I must have misunderstood. So we have we're at the Bella Union and we have fucking Tom Nuttall, right? Is that the one? Or no, Stapleton. Nuttall is the one that I actually like. Stapleton is standing here and when one of the women that showed up with Jack rolls in, named Claudia. Claudia is resplendent with her hair piled up in this fashion that looks like a wig. And it might be actually a wig, but I don't know. Like, it's not exactly in style. Like, she's a little bit behind, actually, if you look at the era. But she has it piled up with this huge hat. And, like, it's got this enormous, drooping, amazing ostrich feather. And then this, like, black and white spattered gown with a red stomacher. The whole look is so intense. And she comes in and sails right on up to Stapleton and flirts with him. And they wind up in bed together. Now, I don't know what to make of this because at the time, I felt as if she was honestly flirting with him. But that's just apparently how good an actress she is. Because it's really obvious later on, after she has slept with Stapleton, that she feels super, super unhappy about this. And, like, there's a posture to her and a tone and a look on her face that says that she feels used. And I don't really know what's happening here because we never saw her be asked to do this. So I don't know if she's under orders to, like, seduce this guy because he's close to Cy. And that's like, but she doesn't, like, I don't see her, what I mean is we haven't seen her express any sort of, like, ambitions for the camp in that way. We haven't seen Jack seem to be, like, engaged with Al in, like, anything beyond a friendship that stretched from where they lived together before, or, like, near each other before. I don't feel like she's part of the criminal, like, spying and all of this. So I'm watching this and I'm like, there has to be another reason for all of this. But then when they actually go back to her room and she actually sleeps with him, I was so startled because I just assumed that there was going to be, like, flirting and teasing not followed up by any sort of actual physical, like, contact between them. But there is. And she's laying there looking like she's on the edge of crying. And he's talking about how Leon says something about how that woman has a front porch on her you could read a book off of. Which he thinks is like a huge compliment. And she sits up and is like kind of holding her arm and just feeling really weird about it. And says it's time to go. And I don't really know what's going on here. She walks past Jack in the hallway and says something about how, like, he says, like, oh, weren't you at this room? And she's like, yes, I'm heading back there now. So it's almost like she slept with this guy purely to make Jack jealous, but I didn't get the feeling that her and Jack were together. And Jack himself seems to me so flamboyant that I assumed that he was gay. Now, maybe he's not, but I just assumed, really. And I don't understand what's happening here. I feel like I either missed something or this is setting up something for me that I'm not supposed to quite understand yet. But anyway, so I just did want to get that out of the way. All right, now let's talk about Alma's bank and the moment with Ellsworth, because I love this so much. So I did have a bit of a moment where I was like, oh, Ellsworth, because he straight up tells her stay out of this at one point. But the way that he says stay out of it got my dander up, and then he continues on in such a manner that I could not help but be like, never mind, it's fine. I'm going to read the way this goes, because there's this dude who is trying to make a deposit, and he says, I want my money to be available day or fucking night, to Trixie. And Trixie says, man, I draw you a map then in case it's night you want it, to lead you to where I live so you can wake me. And he says, now, fuck you then. I ain't depositing. Oh, no. Oh, say it ain't fucking so, you stupid fucking asshole. Oh, my God. If only we were allowed to act this way in customer service jobs. This is giving me such life. I love it. So Ellsworth steps in. Now. Keep your voice down. And Alma starts to get up and says, sir. And he says, stay out of this. And she gets the look that I had of just like, really? And he says, if you make deposits here, if we fucking let you make them, they're backed by this lady's gold mine, so do not confuse her. And guys, I can't tell you how much I loved this turn of the way that he decided to handle this. So do not confuse her with some paper palace fly-by-night who means catch me if you can, turn me upside down, and whatever falls out of my pants pockets is what's behind my script when his note says full faith and credit. And she gets this look on her face like, just exactly what I was feeling of, oh, guy, thanks, appreciate it. And she says, thank you, Mr. Ellsworth. And he continues, she'd make the uses of money available for people in the camp that aren't belligerent cocksuckers. Short of following you around. What is it that he says? Because I really want to get this right. It's just so beautifully done. That ain't belligerent cocksuckers. Short of following you around with her fucking mine on her back, how else is she supposed to do it? Question. Very, very valid question. So then she steps forward. I am Mrs. Ellsworth. And she does it with her smile and her beautiful face and her amazing clothing and her direct eye contact and her warmth, and completely wins him over. And he says, oh, I guess I'll try you out. Trixie, our hearts fucking leap with joy. And Alma gives her a bit of a look before walking away. But I do love it so much. I love it. And later on, there's a moment between all of them when they're at home, because Alma is, she is like standing at the window. And guys, I don't know what to make of this either. I'm really worried though. At the bank, Leon comes up to her a couple of times and sort of, it's a weird vibe where he like kind of flirts with her, and she says, I don't even want to say that she seems receptive, but she doesn't seem as grossed out as I would have expected. And one would think she knows Leon's history and who he works for and what he's done. And the fact that she isn't treating him, for example, the way that she treats EB really surprised me. And then she is standing by the window as Ellsworth sings her fucking praises to Sophia and looks outside and sees Leon standing in the street, and she says she's going to take the air. And I am dying because Leon is a dope fiend and she's an addict in recovery. And what is she doing? Guys, I am incredibly nervous about this. Like, what is she doing? She has to know. Does she want to pick up using again? I feel like she's been so adamant about not doing that with the doc that she dumped the medicine he gave her. She had an excuse to use. What does she think is going to happen? I don't understand. Like, and, you know, I didn't even think about Leon being an addict when he talks to her the first time at the bank. I just thought he was like flirting with her in this weird, I don't know. It's not even like a flirt. It's like there's just subtext there that I feel like I'm not getting. He's talking to her. He says, I'm very keen-eyed, ahead and behind, as he like stares her down. And she's responding as if she knows what he's doing. And that's the part that I'm like, because he said then like, oh, I've been able to read since I was 12. And like he's trying to impress her, which is what made me think that he is like trying to flirt with her. But then I don't know, guys. I'm so confused by this, and by the way that he looks at her and by her response to it. Everything about it is just really surprising and worrying. All right, so last section, I'm going to talk about the unresolved negotiation between Hostetler and drunk Steve. So Hostetler and the general come back into camp with the stallion that they were trying to geld, and of course Steve has already set up in the livery that they abandoned and feels like they did not take responsibility and they do not get to swing back in and take shit from him. Now, as much as his thing about, oh, they're taking from me, when in fact it's something that was theirs to begin with, as much as I see that point, they did abandon it and leave the animals to starve to death if nobody else stepped in. So he's not wrong on that count. However, they ran because he already tried to tar the general, and they know he would have tried to kill them if they had stuck around. So, on that front, I feel like, you know, and then he tries, when they say that, he tries to be like, oh, sure, blame it all on us. And I'm like, well, yes, you literally poured hot tar on this man's shoulder and would have gone further if you hadn't been stopped. So yeah, they should blame you. But the way that Hostetler decides to handle this, I was a little bit surprised, because he's a lot more willing to sort of go toe to toe with this guy. And it's really funny later on, because the general is clearly so disapproving. And he comes in here and tries to have this moment where he's going to offer drunk Steve a job, which I'm like, are you high? Better to just take the livery away from him than suggest that he's going to work under you as your employee. Are you kidding? He's going to lose his shit, which he does. He does lose his shit. And Seth has to like literally hold him back. And as he goes off, he tries to say a couple of things like, oh, he can translate for you since I don't understand your fucking gorilla speech. And Seth has to be like, if you fucking insult him again, I'm going to bash you in the back of the head. Like, he is so irritated right out of the gate. And it just keeps getting worse because the entire episode is Seth going back and forth through the camp trying to deal with these two prideful pains in the ass who do not want to cooperate with each other. And he cannot anymore. He is so irritated by the end of this. I swear to God, guys, I could not stop laughing. Like, it's just so, the look on his face every time one of them comes up with a new like problem with the solution that they are trying to work with is so precious to me. I mean, so what Seth comes up with is, what if he buys the livery off you? And Hostetler's like, well, I was planning to head up to Oregon, so okay, we can do that. And this dude, of course, feels like that. Like, at first he's like, well, yeah, that's fine. But then it's an issue of who's going to sign the sale agreement first. And Seth has to go to Alma and get the money from her for the loan for drunk Steve. Because Steve isn't going to, like, he doesn't want to manage anything himself. Seth has to do this for them because they are such children who are unwilling to communicate directly with each other like fucking adults, that they need an intermediary like this. And the only reason that Seth is willing to put in the kind of work with the patients that he is because he is doing this in William's memory. At least that's what he says. Just basically like, I am aware that this kid would not want you guys hurt because of an accident. The horse hurt. Like, I don't want any more terrible shit to come out of this accident than already has. He's dead. It's about as bad as it gets. Can we just sidestep any further ugliness? And so he is trying so hard to keep his temper. The moment when Hostetler starts yelling, "You son of a bitch," to Steve, I almost started cheering. I mean, this guy really needs to be talked to like that. But understandably, it's not super great for negotiation. So at that point, Seth steps in and kind of like ushers him out of there. And part of me was kind of like, oh, come on. And another part of me was like, all right, fine. I know that's not great for negotiation, but like, he has just put up with so much verbal abuse from this dude already. And then as Seth is walking around ready to lose his mind, I was thinking this myself and wondered why Seth didn't think of it. And Saul is the one who's like, have them meet up together somewhere that's neutral and they can sign it at the same time. And Seth sort of turns and looks at him and is like, oh, okay, yeah. And then kind of gives him a smile like, thanks. And I'm like, dude, how did you not think about that? That's normally how these kinds of like transactions are handled anyway, is that both parties are present and they both sign simultaneously, like a lot of the time. But apparently it had not occurred to him to do it that way because he is just so like locked into this fucking back and forth that he isn't thinking outside of that. So it seems like that's going to work out next episode, fingers crossed, because I really just want Hostetler and the General to be able to make it out of here alive. Like, honestly, that's just what that's it. That's what I need. I need it. And also, please, nothing happen to Joni. And please don't let Mrs. Ellsworth get addicted to opium again. And can we not have the doctor die of consumption or whatever it is that's happening? And I don't want anything to happen to Dan. So that's my wish list for the rest of this season. All right, well, I'm going to wrap this up, but thank you guys very much for coming and hanging out with me. Thank you again to Patrick for commissioning this episode. Hugely appreciate it. And I will be seeing you all again soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
an Unspoiled Network podcast.